My name is Deepak Wadhwa. I am the co-founder and CEO of Locofast.
Fashion is a $2.5 trillion industry globally, with a complex supply chain that includes diverse stakeholders ranging from yarn manufacturers to designers to apparel manufacturers to big brands like H&M and Zara. Locofast is building an asset-light fulfillment platform that helps fashion brands to source from small apparel companies. In this episode, your host Akshay Dutt is talking with Deepak Wadhwa, a serial entrepreneur and the founder of Locofast. Deepak started his career with Make My Trip and soon after that jumped into entrepreneurship to build a platform for customers to buy a complete holiday package as compared to other travel sites that were focusing only on flights or hotels. After a roller coaster ride that ended with the business getting acquired, Deepak started his second venture, Locofast, with an eye on solving problems with a large market opportunity. This conversation starts with Deepak's first venture called We Are Holidays and ends with his current startup, Locofast. Listen on, and if you like such insightful conversations with disruptive startup founders, then do subscribe to the Founder Thesis podcast on any audio streaming app.
But the fact that I went to Make My Trip is what I realized that, hey, here is another way of building something out that will really at least keep me excited, keep me happy, and keep me really will basically match my restless quotient in some way. So I think that's really where I decided that, okay, I think I need to start a tech company. I think that's really how the idea really came in. And I was there for about nearly a couple of years at Make My Trip. But I was very clear that, listen, I wanted to now build a company of my own and basically add value and create something afresh. And that was something which, yeah.
What were you doing at Make My Trip? What was your...
I was an early product manager at Make My Trip. I think those were the times when the holiday business of Make My Trip wasn't as large. It was predominantly an air and a hotel business. I joined as one of the early product managers for the holiday business. And it was still where it was simple static website where we were just collecting holiday inquiries. So I think I just joined very early on in that function, and the fact that it was an emerging line of business, it was a line of business which had future sort of aspirations, company and the aspirations to grow in that segment. I think I then got to really work very closely with some of the really smart people, as well as some of the members of the leadership team as well. So in some way, I just was lucky to be at that point in a product management function in a fast-growing internet company, to be the same air in terms of being able to work on problems that were extremely challenging, in being able to have some level of confidence and satisfaction in being able to do what I was able to do. So I think that was the click, and that was probably the time that I'd been most motivated about. All of us engineering students or graduate students, while we get into engineering colleges and management colleges, but very soon we realized that this is not the most exciting thing. But I would say that I think when I was at Make My Trip, that was probably the first time in the last 5-6 years that I think the level of excitement was really high, right? Which was really pointing to that direction that, okay, I think that's really the direction that I want to take up in my life and continue doing that. While at that time, I think back in 2011-12, the ecosystem wasn't as mature as it is today. We were lucky.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you. What made you quit a reasonably well-paying job at a time when it was not normal to quit a job and do your startup? Tell me about that journey from being employed to...
Well, yes, to be honest, and that's where I want to be absolutely honest, I think I came from background where I was still staying with my parents, and it's just one of those typical mentality that we just all of us are together. There is a backing I have. What if it doesn't work out? So I would absolutely owe and credit to the fact that I could leave a job and then jump into something that is very unknown back then. I think the primary reason was that I think I had some backup. I think I could always go back to joining my business or even pick up another thing. So luckily I didn't have any education loans, or I didn't have really any other loans that were going on at that time. And I consider myself extremely privileged, because I'm sure there are 2 on 10 or 3 on 10 folks out there who have privilege. But luckily I had the privilege, so the decision wasn't very tough. To be honest, for my co-founder back then, the decision was absolutely tough because he didn't have those leverages or he didn't have those things. But I think what I've also realized is that I could never become complacent with that cushioning, right? Because I was, again, when you pick up your bag, leave in the morning, I think you just leave. You have to build your own thing bottoms up. So I think I was lucky to have that cushion so that I could really not worry about anything and then just go build something that I liked.
So you were already doing holidays at Make My Trip.
Yeah.
What did you want to do different?
To be honest, and I think continuation to that thought, back then, 2012, when ecosystem wasn't as open, right? I think the entire idea of how you discover the problem, how at the end of the day, I was still, 27, 28 years old. Ecosystem India was just opening up. There wasn't exposure to just too many different business models. I think the different thing that we really had was that I think we wanted to build a holiday company which was asset light, right? Predominantly, holidays were sold through call centers and retail's view back then was that could we really build an asset light company of holidays on the cloud? Basically means could you not own or operate any of, largely if not a call center driven or a retail store driven sales, could you really aggregate a lot of travel agents and mom and pop travel stores that would actually then sell to the customers, right? So I think that was really the thought. It was a B2C marketplace of holidays, where we basically wanted customers to come, find out the right travel option, we match him with the provider on ground, and then basically ensure that he had a good experience and we took complete care of end-to-end responsibility of his vacation going smooth. So that was really the core. And I think back then, most of the OTAs and more online Make My Trip and host of other online and offline players were either running call centers or some of them running retail stores to basically run and sell holidays. So I think that journey was basically trying to create something which is asset light, which is more scalable, which is more operationally efficient, which then could manifest into a large company. Yeah.
Okay. How do you do category management for the product of holidays? Say for e-commerce, I understand category management. You will list the SKU and the variants, the color, the size, etc., etc.
Yeah.
How would it happen here? Could every travel agent upload their own unique itinerary and then a customer would search and see results from 10 different travel agents? Or would there be standardized itineraries and people would pick and choose one and then you would decide which agent gets to serve it? Or tell me a bit about how you executed on this.
Sure. So if you really look at the holiday product in general, right? I think a lot of it is just about, apart from booking, there's a lot of element of discovery in that entire phase, right? Most of the e-com, large part of it is basically booking, where you know you want this and then you look amongst 5, 7, 10 options. But in holiday, there's a far greater element of discovery that is expected to solve for the customer than some of the other e-com platforms, right? So that's a unique attribute. Two, now you could solve the discovery through online and offline, right? Online could just be you probably put what you're looking at and then the system gives you generated itineraries and try to drive you through your decision-making process. On the other end, basically you have people that you speak to or multiple portals that you go to. Each one of them gives you a couple of nuggets, unique nuggets, and then you put together all of those nuggets and form your holiday, right? While we started with the belief of first, the former, which is that we could do a lot of that discovery online and digitally. But very quickly we realized that I think the discovery, to solve discovery through tech, was basically restricted, and you had to have a mix of technology and human intervention to be able to guide the customer through the entire discovery process. So to answer your question, while we did have base level itineraries that our travel agents would put on the platform, but a lot of support also came in when the travel agents actually spoke to the customers at length, actually managed their requirement, actually then build custom itineraries around those, gave unique nuggets on how you should really go about spending a couple of days here, if not there. All of that actually used to be through conversations with the agents. So it was a mix of technology plus human intervention, both of which would basically help them and guide them through the discovery process. And the fact that we were a marketplace where everybody was competing for more business on the platform, by design, we obviously had the advantage of getting the best price. We had the advantage of getting the best product for our customers at the best possible price. So it was often the case that if we lost customer, we often lost the customer at a discovery stage. But mostly once the customer has discovered, then I think the pricing of the platform was such that we were able to actually do a great job of booking for our customers, which really solved the problem for customers looking to buy a good option of holiday at the best possible price.
How did you not get bypassed? If you're saying the travel agent speaks to the customer directly, there's that risk of...
A very interesting question. I think and we did, obviously, like any other person on the other side, we debated this in our team like for a good 6 months, right? But the fact of the matter now, when I look back, I just feel that I think largely people are honest, right? Largely about 95-96% of people are honest. Probably 3-4% of people would do some sort of thing. But then you have to have checks and balances to ensure that it is not a very high percentage of what you do. For example, we used to do basic things such as the number of the customer only gets revealed to you once the customer has shown interest in your product. The email that goes to the customer is not from your email ID, it was possibly a masked email ID. Third is probably you call customer from a cloud telephony number and not your direct number. So I think there were a lot of intervention that we'd done back then to ensure that customer was not bypassing. And also we used to do a lot of activity on the customer side to tell them that if you bypass, we do not have any responsibility of ownership of the holiday. If we will ensure that the money is paid to the agent once you come back, which means that any services lag that you might have, you can always come and address. So I just felt we did a constant education on both these sides, along with technology interventions, 3-4 of which I mentioned. But honest to say, was there a 1 or 2% pilferage? Absolutely. But I just felt that overall the business was more scalable. Overall the business made far more sense to actually have some of these people talk directly to the customer, because I think the customer need was to actually answer all his questions for something that he's going to buy once in a year, spend about a couple of lakh rupees, right? So I just felt that the problem was there. Now it's up to us on how we address it. But we just can't ignore the problem and then be stuck on the fact that we don't want our agents to talk to our customers. I think we were in some way we were consumer first, and we felt that I think we should do what's best for the customer, even though we run the risk of pilferage. But then I think these are some of the business problems that you solve, and which really make everything so interesting. Then human tendency is to bypass. What sort of tools and processes do you have so that these don't happen?
And what was your take rate in it? What was the economics like?
We started with about a 4.5-5%, and would go on to be about 9.5-10%.
Okay, which is small enough so that an agent would not want to jeopardize that relationship with you. Because I think a customer would probably not. 1.5
for 8,000, like 12,000 rupees, right? So that's a lot of money, right? So I think the average size of the transaction was very high. So I think the incentive was definitely there. But I think the fact that as an agent you get blacklisted from the platform, and as an agent you then do not get any further business, I think the cost of bypassing that was huge enough for the agent to actually do that. But we did have 1 or 2 agents that came to our notice of having done that. But that didn't really happen in all marketplace. I even remember back then when Flipkart or Amazon started to basically call up the seller and actually confirm that is it the seller that is selling this product, right? And all of us have done that in our early days, right? But I think in hindsight, I feel we often overmind the pilferage or overmind the ability of a vendor to call up customer directly on a direct transaction. I think we just tend to overmind that aspect. Mostly if there are fair dealings on the platform, mostly if as a platform you're fair in your dealing in terms of commissions and payments, then I think there is little less incentive for some of these people to actually buy the platform.
So what was a bigger challenge for you? Was it building up supply, which means onboarding the travel agents who would list inventory, or was it building up demand, which is attracting customers who would buy on the
always
platform?
Supply, right? I think it's always supply, right? I think demand is still, my view of marketplace is that if you build quality supply, customers will come. Any marketplace where you have quality supply, customers exist, customers want to get the best product at the best price, so the demand exists. It's not that you create the demand. So absolutely supply, hands down, was the hardest thing to create. And back then, getting people to adopt product, getting people to adopt technology, trust asking people to take money after the holiday has been availed were some of the really hard things that we had to do. And that was really the process of building supply.
Can you elaborate more on how you built supply? What were the things you did? Like, how did you get your first 100 agents on board? I'm assuming it must have been very manual initially, and then you would have productized it. And so I'd love to hear about that journey.
Yeah. So I think, look, for us, we believe we still, here as well, we had a great team that was really close-knit, and where it basically everything just starts with an Excel and a Google, right? Where you start looking for agents and start talking to them over the phone. So I think we probably build a database of all the agents out there, call them up, even have somebody on ground to go visit them. So we would create a database, have our inside sales team call them, explain the value prop. Somebody would go down on ground, meet that agent, start feeding some inquiries to the agent, and basically get the first couple of transactions done. What we realized was that the maximum churn happens in the first week, 10 days of onboarding. And if within a week, 10 days, you're able to get him a transaction or two, is where the customer, where the vendor really sticks to the platform. And where we found tremendous amount of value in being able to work really closely with them to show them success on the platform. And I think once you show them 2, 3, 4 transactions is when most of those guys then become self-participative, they adopt technology, they are willing to work out the commission structure, they are willing to address quality issues, they are willing to not bypass. All of those things just automatically falls in place. I think the value of death in some way is the first couple of transactions, or first 4, 5 transactions that any particular player on the marketplace actually ends up doing. So I think that's really was very clear. We were very clear. We had a separate hunting and a farming team, which basically meant that our guys would actually special focus was attributed on vendors that had to be hunted within that first week, 10 days, 15 days of time frame, where we would ensure that they get their first transaction. And once it basically came on the transaction is when we basically have them move on to the other team, which is the farming team.
Yeah. So you are onboarding a travel agent, and a holiday is a very high touch kind of an experience. If something goes wrong, it could be even something very minor, but the negative feedback would be massive. How did you ensure that quality is met? Because you don't necessarily have a lot of data about who's a good agent, who's not a good agent in the initial days, and because the cost of a mistake would be very high here.
So I think there are different ways of, and very good question, applicable to all marketplaces, right? So definitely you have to take a leap of faith, right? I would lie to say that you don't have to take a leap of faith, because you have to get the flywheel going, right? You have to get the flywheel of demand and supply going, because if that flywheel doesn't operate, then basically the marketplace is actually a cold start. You have the cold start problem, right? How do you really start this thing, right? To begin with, absolutely, I think you just try to look at any small thing. Our team would go to a travel agent and try to see, okay, what is the size of his office, the number of people sitting in his office, is it a rented place or is it an old place, what are the reviews of that. Very interestingly, you would actually see, does the travel agent have a website? What is the quality of the website? Is it a private limited company? Is it a proprietorship company? What sort of a turnover does the agent have? Everything that one could gather from secondary as well as primary sources is basically building this image in your mind if he's a qualified agent or he's not a qualified agent. But even after those checks, would we have a scenario where somebody would come on the platform who really didn't cut the quality or the delivery SLA? Absolutely, we had that. But were we able to get our arms around it and actually solve it for the customer? Absolutely. And that was really where we had a customer success team that would work very closely with our agents, very closely with our customers, and any experience deficiency or anything which they basically didn't go as per plan used to basically get addressed with topmost priority, because we understood that the product we were selling is a product where if you do a great job, then yes, the customer will be a customer for life. But if you did not really do a good job, then rest be assured that not only he's not going to come back, he's going to probably tell 15 of his friends to never come and book a holiday. So definitely, I think the nature of the product was such, the nature of the transaction was such, that we had to be very certain that customer success, ability to give a good experience, really had a top sort of was on top agenda for us as a team.
And how did you fund this? You would have probably needed funds right from the start to build a product, to build a team which is doing the onboarding, and before you start earning enough take rate to meet your expenses. So how did that happen?
We did start with some of our own money to begin with, right? Very small money, but we were lucky to get a seed round within the first 1 year since starting out. I think we raised a seed round with a bunch of investors, ventures, Mumbai Angels, bunch of other notable angel investors came along in the journey. To answer the question, we're extremely lucky to basically not having to spend a lot of our own money, because obviously we were out of jobs. We really didn't have the money, but we were able to basically attract investment at the right time. So we were lucky to not having to invest a lot from our own pockets on the up. And within the first year, we were able to attract angel investment and then invest that into building our product, tech, and sales teams. So I would say that I think we were just lucky to get capital just in the nick of time for us to not having to spend. Because we were out of jobs, we didn't have a lot of money ourselves. So I think back then, I'm extremely thankful to our early backers, right? And I think back then, like I said, ecosystem wasn't as mainstream as it is now. So for us to basically raise capital within 12 months of inception was basically a big deal, right? So I thank all the people that believed in us back then to basically back us and get the venture going.
And how much did you raise in total, like throughout the duration?
We raised a lot of money. In fact, we raised about not more than very little, $2.5 million we had raised.
Okay. Yeah. And why is that? Were the unit economics good enough? Did you keep a tight control on costs? Was the customer acquisition cost low? Or?
I'll tell you, we had an acquisition later on, right? Beyond a Series A, we had an acquisition, right? And
which year was this, the acquisition?
This was in 17 actually, 2017.
Okay.
17 when we had the acquisition, right? We obviously, till now, if you see, and in retrospect, it's been 5 years since we exited the business, right? We just feel that there is still an opportunity to build a large holiday company in the country. But there isn't any till now, right? There isn't any. There is a large air tickets company, there's a large hotel company, there's a large bus ticket company, there's a large cab company, but there is really no large holiday company. And I think there are, if I were to look back, and obviously some of these are more my personal experience, may not be entirely true, I'm sure. And obviously this is hindsight again, hindsight 2020, right? You often obviously look back. I think one of the core reasons is that a lot of online travel agents, which are the likes of Make My Trip and some of the other OTAs, are actually able to acquire a customer a lot cheaply through the air ticket funnel, right? Which basically means that the fact that they will always be able to acquire customers cheaply or cheaper than you means that you forever not have the luxury of actually acquiring customer cheaper than the large OTAs, right? Point number one. Point number two is that the frequency of the purchase is really once in a year, which then means that the flywheel of customer acquisition, it's not like cab. The fact that you need it once in a year makes it even more difficult for you to actually get the customer back at a cheaper cost again, even though you may have given him a good experience or you may have given her a good experience. And third of all, the fact that we were a marketplace, which means that the services that were getting rendered to the customer weren't really our own services in a way, they were a part of the marketplace, which then means that our ability to influence the service levels were very limited. The service experience, like the cab could be cleaner, the cab could smell better, the driver could be well mannered, the driver could follow traffic rules. You could make some of these alterations, cab business, but you cannot really make those alterations in a holiday business, especially when customer spends a lot of duration on a holiday. Along with that, it is an extremely high involvement product. Just that the fact that the business was on marketplace or the model was a marketplace model, we could not really hugely influence the quality of the services rendered to the customer on ground, which meant that were customers happy, they were happy, but the happiness wasn't really translating into repeat purchase because you would only go once in a year. And that was really the question that we could never answer for ourselves, because the nature of the product along with customer acquisition really didn't make it like a flywheel that would get to escape velocity and then will go on its own. So I think that's really the core my and our sort of our experience and our view of running a business for good 4 or 5 years, where we realized that I think that's really how it is. To say that can somebody build an extremely large holiday company? Absolutely, the opportunity still exists. But I think some of the challenges that we faced or some of the thesis we got built out was basically the thesis that I'm just telling you, right? About the product and the customer acquisition.
Yeah, so what is the way to build a large company then? Own the whole thing?
If your question is, if I were to do it again, I think somewhere if you see, while you may pick up a niche, but I think within that niche, you have to ensure that you're able to influence the service levels and of the customer.
What Airbnb is able to do, for example?
So the fact that they started out, it was a niche. It appeared to be a niche, but then it became mainstream like how. So I think holidays typically, and I don't know if you've seen or heard the Airbnb story, right? The fact that it was just so counterintuitive back then to basically have a stranger come to your house and stay is the reason why it is such a large company today, right? I just feel holiday is that kind of a product, right? And that's why it's more complex. I think it requires a great amount of customer understanding. It requires a great amount of ecosystem understanding. And when I say ecosystem, it is in general the hospitality ecosystem, right? The cabs, the activities, the hotels, the transfers, the ferry transfers. There's just so much within that. There's just so many moving variables, right? Which is that if you think of a niche, I think you do a far better job in a niche than going all out, because then while you may acquire customers, you will never be able to retain them long enough, because the level of services rendered through your platform or through your partners will actually be pretty similar to what he or she gets elsewhere. So while you may have saved some money for customers to book through the platform, but is that really enough for him to come back is really the question that one should ask building this. But to be honest, yes, I think it is a tough market to break in. I think we haven't seen a large company getting built out there. For a lack of my knowledge, I may be wrong as well. I'm sure there's somebody building that. But for us, that's what our understanding of the business was, is that if you operate in a niche and then influence the level of services, either by, if not operating it directly, but at least the relationship has to be tighter in a manner that you could actually give a much better level of services to the customer.
So you're essentially saying that Airbnb has more bargaining power because they started in a niche and hence they were able to influence the hosts. And as they scaled, then obviously scale also gives you bargaining power. Initially, the niche gave them bargaining power. Later, scale gave them bargaining power to influence service quality.
I think the most beautiful, like I said, I think just one of the most counterintuitive companies that have been built out there, right? So I think any analysis that one does is just wrong because it was so counterintuitive, right? But I think the fact that they could create supply which never existed is the most beautiful part of the business, right? All of us just look at the existing supply, try to build a tech layer on that, try to set processes, try to get a better outcome through marketplaces, give them technology, give them logistics, give them credit. But the fact that they could fundamentally think of just a fresh pool of supply, which nobody ever has thought, is just the most amazing reason why it's just massively successful. And I think then you really are not basically operating like a travel company. Then I think you basically could be like, you could actually influence the service levels of the customer. Because the host then again does not operate like a hotel. A host is an individual, right? And then you are able to actually create by design, there is choice and variety on the platform because each host will do up his house differently. You will have houses across different geographies, across different terrains, and you'll have choice by design because every host is different and every room is different and every property is different. And then if you are basically able to then ensure that whatever gets promised gets delivered on ground. And then as long as the stay is safe, as long as the person gets, I'm sure you've stayed and so have I. I think mostly it's been a good experience, right? Obviously they have a share of challenges and all of those things, but I think the reason why they've become massively successful is that they were able to just tap into a supply which just never existed in the first place, which is really what is the most beautiful part of building Airbnb, and why I feel the founders are probably once in a century kind of founders that would actually go on to leave their jobs and basically max their credit card out for an idea which looked just so counterintuitive to begin with.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's an amazing insight. Okay, and what was the reason for Cox and King to acquire? Like, they wanted a marketplace because they
Well, I
have their own in-house.
I think in general, obviously, in general, a large offline travel strategic would not have the tech or the product DNA in general. I think the starting point of our association with them was that they just never had the tech and the product DNA. So I think integrating a sort of an agile team like ours would basically help them catch up, or at least build products that were basically directed as digital products to their users. They were back then obviously one of the most distinguished names. They already had the customer base, they already had the supply partnership. They were the hospitality company in true sense, which is the offline thing. Us coming into the umbrella basically meant that they could ship out digital products faster. Us coming into the umbrella meant that we could give ancillary services, that we could build ancillary products on top of their current ecosystem so that they could have a better customer experience and better customer retention. That was the sort of the 10,000 feet view of how we got aligned with the large travel strategic, and then basically got working with them very closely.
Okay. So, once you got acquired, then what next? Did you? I guess there must have been a lock-in period, and
Yeah, and mostly, and obviously, I think most of these things do have lock-in periods, right? So definitely, we did have that. We were associated with them for a little over a year, if I'm not wrong. And then, as we'd expected, I think we very quickly realized that I think it is not going to be the place where with everything in place, I think, but just that, I think very different DNAs. I think no right or wrong, it's just different DNAs. And then we probably thought that, okay, I think we probably need to get on and see what's out there. And by that time, if you see, things were beginning to sprung up. I think things were beginning to take shape. The ecosystem was maturing. Capital was becoming more mainstream. Companies were getting started a lot more. There were a lot of first, second founders. So I just felt that the ecosystem was a very 2017, mid and 18 was an extremely exciting time, at least from a capital perspective and from just in general business models, just in general new companies emerging, just in general different areas that were getting touched through technology. So I just feel that was the time when, and as the inkling goes, right? I mean, the time that we spent with them, obviously the pace of work was not as what we had in our own sort of company, so which basically meant that we were itching to go back and get more, work on ideas that excite us, work on something which was bigger. All of that was basically there, right? While it was a good welcome year and a half of kind of a period where we could just take a breather and then take a stock of the situation before really refueling and getting started with the journey all over again. And I just felt that's the reason we basically then were more energized to start all over again.
Did you get enough of a cash exit to fund your next startup? Or?
I think, and enough, yes. But I was very certain that I think the fact that we've already done one, I think raising capital would not be as hard. I think one of the things that I was not too worried, I was also very worried about what to work on, what's the product market fit, what's the team's going to be like. But I think the thing that I was least worried about is raising capital, because I knew that I think if I've done it once, then I think it would. Obviously, I knew the people in the ecosystem, so yeah, I think it would not be as hard. So at least I was aware that at least the first couple of rounds, I think, should not be any challenge, because I just have been around and I've just known people and I've executed a business to give that confidence that yes, I could build something even more worthwhile. So I think that was never a concern. But definitely there was, again, element, like in any, I think, second time founders or whatever, third time founders, I just feel at least that element of self-doubt, that element of what to work on, that element of product market fit, all of those are just problems that one has to face, and there is just no replacing those problems, right? While you get better at hiring teams, you get better at retaining teams, you get better at raising capital, you get better at executing product roadmaps. But I mean, in terms of anything which is exploratory, in terms of finding the idea, in terms of the exact niche to go after, in terms of all of that is, again, it's just very unique to every business.
Like how did
Sure. So, yeah. So I tell you, like I said, if you're living in a joint family or living with parents, right, they don't understand the meaning of sabbatical. They don't understand that, listen, take a year easy, take a year and a half easy before you start out, right? For them, probably in a week's time, they will start considering, okay, what next now? When you want to be, because for them, sabbatical is like being unemployed, right? You're sitting at home, nothing, it's being unemployed, right? So I just felt, I think that will probably push me to, my father would often tell me, why don't you come to my manufacturing facility and see what's happening there? And I think is he got the opportunity and he was very happy to find me without work. And that's okay. I could make some good use of this guy who seemingly seemed to know a lot of things that I don't. So he would often take me to his manufacturing facility and then ask me to add wherever value that I can. And I probably did that for like good 6-8 months, or at least, or even more, probably an year. And I think that was really where, if you see and we are like a typical SME, if some of the listeners, or if you ever, it's a very different sort of an area, right? It's far away from the typical VC funded swanky offices, and you probably burn more than you earn. It's a very different ecosystem. And I just felt that it was probably the best thing I could have done. I don't think I could have done anything, because that was probably the first time that I had been to his office, because I was a part of one industry. And what I realized is that mostly SMEs across industries have similar sort of problems. I had my friend, I come from Faridabad, like I said, half a dozen of my friends run some SME or the other. Somebody is manufacturer for steel fabrication, somebody does some rubber fabrication, I was into plastic, somebody else did some other metal. So I basically, once I was there, I would probably go to their workplace, and I pretty much found similar sort of, in a way, they were similar way of functioning. They just had how they operate was very similar. And that was the most fascinating part of it, where actually you could understand the SME really in and out, right? Just feel that I was lucky enough. One, I've been born in that city. Two, I have friends that run those means. I have uncles, I have my own father. There would have been no better coaching, right? I wish I had this coaching before I started my first venture. But I think there wasn't a better time, or there wasn't a better way of getting coached, right? Because it was just, and anybody who runs an SME, anybody who runs a business, the fact that a lot of those people don't understand how some of these VC funded businesses or some of these funded businesses work is because it's fundamentally very different on how things operate. To give you 3-4 very practical examples, one is there is just an element of trust on how they do transactions, right? Their material procurement, their delivery, all happens on trust, right? And that's something which, in a society like ours, we don't, right? For us here, when we run a company, we have agreements, we have everything, agreement, the customer agreement. So it just feels that just very different world, right? And in terms of every small thing, the most amazing way is how they control cost, right? The way they're able to control cost, and the way where every cent or every rupee that they spend is actually measured. It's such a phenomenal. I mean, we typically talk about revenue per employee. I think some of the SMEs would really do a great job on that, because if you really see the way some of their cost structures are managed, is extremely important. It's extremely beautiful to see. And that really makes them hugely successful. And by design, I feel a lot of them are extremely successful for the reason because they have that fundamental aspect of keeping cost under control, of thinking long term, right? I think long term thinking in SMEs, right? My father runs this business for the last 35 years, 40 years, doing the same thing. And just imagine how to build a company. If you were to do, I've begun to realize that if you spend that kind of time doing anything, you'll be successful, right? I think the fact that SMEs do this for a long time makes them really successful, right? I think there was the fact that how they would aggressively do sourcing for their raw material, right? How aggressively they would drive down a couple of percentage points on the commission, right? How aggressively they would attend to customer complaints if ever a customer complains, right? I think these are some really good lessons to learn. And I just feel probably the most satisfying part of my sabbatical period was actually I got really good training and really good insights into how an SME works. And I think for me, that was, yeah.
Okay, so what was the gap you identified? You must have seen an opportunity in the SME sector.
Yeah. I think opportunity is everywhere, right? I mean, I think in SME, when you touch SME, there's opportunity everywhere, right? I think the opportunity that I think I was very clear, one is obviously the two things that really came out very clearly. One is how the logistics was still very broken, right?
Okay. Logistics from me to customer or?
SME to customer or SME procurement, I think logistics of that was completely broken, right? Two, I think procurement in general we felt was broken, right? Procurement was always at spot rates. Procurement was always at the rates which are in the prevalent in the market today. Procurement was always happening once there is a fresh order placed from the customer. It was always the case where as SMEs that would keep very limited inventory, they will always go procure when they have an order in hand, which then made the procurement extremely inefficient because there was a lot of intermediary involvement, there was a lot of information asymmetry, there was a lot of quality asymmetry that one would run into. So I just felt the two North Stars that really came out while I was there. I think logistics as a problem for SMEs, plus I guess procurement is something that really stood out, and procurement is something which I felt was one of the areas that I would be interested in spending the next 8-10 years of my life. And I think procurement, yes, I think that's really where it came from. Procurement as a horizontal really came out, right? Yes.
By problems in logistics, you mean, say, there's no, say, how as a consumer you have Uber, which can give you an instant logistics for your personal transport. SMEs didn't have something like that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the fact that, and I'll tell you what used to typically happen, right? You basically call a gaadi from the aggregator, and the guy would not pick up your phone. The guy he would send would probably come half an hour, because they're typically, I'll tell you what happens in every SME, right? The dispatches start in the morning, right? You've manufactured through the night the goods, and the goods are now ready to be shipped, right? And most of the industrial clusters, everybody wants a gaadi at 10, 10:30 or 11 in the morning, right? Now, what happens because of that is that definitely the customer that is on a credit will not get preference. The customer in cash will get preference. Somebody staying a couple of extra bucks gets the credit, gets the service. So there were these typical issues of failure to be able to ship the goods in time and get that gaadi on the gate at 10 o'clock in the morning. And there was a lot of failure into that. And everything was selling because once it starts at 10, if it has to cover the NCR, then the no entry would start. The customer would not convert the goods after a particular time of the day. The next shipment would get delayed. Their invoice will not get punched the day. The gaadi has to come back and then go the next day. So there were fundamentally issues where I could see within where I was working, at least there were 2-3 individuals in the team that would forever be haggling with the gaadi guy in terms of why the material has not reached on time, right? And because everything is just, imagine the guy having to come back and go the next day. And that was like, it was a big deal for a gaadi to come back and go the next day because there's an extra cost incurred to that. Just feel that overall, the level of activity around logistics was extremely high, which made me realize that I think the problem is really out there, which is a delivery that can be done at a certain time of a day without failure, and ensure that the material is inverted to the customer in time, so that the money then starts from therein and there is no wastage around that.
Okay, got it. And from a procurement perspective, some of the things that you said, like they buy once they get an order on the spot. What is the problem in that? This is like normal business practice, right?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, typically what happens is, mostly if you see, SMEs are typically looking at credit as one of the core attributes, right, when they purchase a product. So there are two types of SMEs, right? One SME, okay, to be honest, I have myself seen that some of my friends that are there actually have slightly longer working capital cycles, so they always optimize credit, correct? And there are a set of uncles that I have that run a similar business, but they want the best price, right? So there are these two sides to the coin, which is that one is optimizing for the best price, and other is optimizing for the best working capital terms, right? Again, at a cost, right? What's the cost of that? And that's where I felt that as your number of SKUs grew, as the product became complex, then a lot of information and credit asymmetry started seeping into your quoted price, right? For example, if I call you for a product, for example, back in those days when I come from Make My Trip, so most of my every second example that I quote is travel example. The fact how a Make My Trip democratized the rates of the airlines on a single platform, right? There actually exists no democratization of procurement in any of the industry we're talking about, right? It was always the same thing. You would call up three travel agents and ask for the flight rate. Here, you'll call up three different traders and ask for the same product rate, right? I just feel things remain the same in an industry which got impacted by tech the very first, which is travel. I think the same, I was able to draw the same parallel, but I was never able to find a similar solution that why do procurement have to be so hard? Why couldn't I have a Make My Trip kind of an interface that gives me the best price? And then once I basically make a booking, ensure that the product reaches to me at the desired timeline and at the desired price at my doorstep, right? I think even today, vast procurement across SMEs, across all industries, is still driven through the telephone and the paper and the WhatsApp. And the process of placing a purchase order, the process of getting an invoice, the process of getting a way bill generated, the process of getting the logistic details, the process of getting the material to your doorstep is actually a very painful process.
Okay, so
And
those workflows are all manual, like.
absolutely, and they are manual even now as we speak, because such is the might of the industry, such is the size of the industry, that I think there could probably be about 50 tech companies that could actually do it, and there would still be more to do. I just feel that's really the problem, which is that the entire workflows are completely broken. The entire workflows are analog. The entire workflows are, and what happens because of that is that there's a lot of losses that happen from one state to the other. There are losses, there is, and then whenever something like that happens, it's often, if you see, intermediaries or offline intermediaries then tend to come in and then basically play the role. And you really see then a human is basically playing the role of becoming that comforting factor to ensure that the goods are delivered to you, right? That's how the trader community in general thrives, which is that they bridge trust on both the sides. It bridges some, which I was talking earlier, it bridges trust on either side. It bridges the credit exposure on each of these sides because one party doesn't really know the other. Third, it also ensures that there is risk mitigation, which is ability to be able to arrange material when it's not available, ability to be able to provide material when it's not available, ability to provide capital when it's not available, are some of these reasons why, in the traditional sense, along with SMEs, large part of SMEs continue to procure through intermediaries, right? And most of the manufacturers are actually large guys, commodities, they're large manufacturers in a different geography, right? And for an SME based in a certain place, it's very difficult to, while he may know that an X party or an X manufacturer would provide me the goods, but it's very difficult to deal. And even for a manufacturer, instead of dealing with 100 different SMEs at one time, why would they basically not have an agent or an intermediary or a trader in between sometime to basically ensure that the business on either side, it disintermediates, it actually gives you orders for the manufacturer and is able to provide services to each of these SMEs, right? And which is typically how business has been done for the last 50 years, right?
Okay. So your thesis was to build a platform, like say a Flipkart for fashion industry, like say Pantaloons or any of these fashion companies
Anybody would want to come who wants to procure bulk fabric could come on a platform, basically place an order and get the delivery of the fabric in the fastest possible time at the best product, at the best possible price and at the best possible quality. I think those were really the larger sort of themes that we actually had. And like I said, I think in some way we wanted to disintermediate the entire supply chain, where we wanted to basically have manufacturers and customers on one single platform rather than multiple layers of agents or traders in between. And we've all heard the maximum number of intermediaries are actually in textiles.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if you
what is the traditional supply chain in textile?
Traditional supply chain is that you have a fabric manufacturer who would basically be based out of basis the type of fabric he or she makes would be based in a certain geography in the country, right? If you're selling silk.
And these people would be buying like raw cotton or whatever viscose or whatever they need from.
And then make a fabric out of it. These guys are typically based out of tier 2, tier 3 towns in India. If you want silk, you go to Banaras. If you want cotton, you go to someplace in Maharashtra. If you want rayon, you go to someplace in Tamil Nadu. That's really how textile is basically scattered. The clusters of textile are scattered as such. And then these are typically, again, SMEs, right? With lack of access of working capital, no market intelligence, ability to not be able to acquire customers themselves, fall up for payment, fall up for quality, fall up for logistics. A classic case where very difficult for some of these guys to actually operate business from a demand side. While they're great at manufacturing the product, but very difficult for them to go market this product in an extremely new and different geography.
That's where the traders would come in, I'm guessing, in the supply chain.
The traders would basically come in, buy the entire product lot from them, and then connect them to demand pockets, connect them to customers, connect them to brand, and basically get them business. And over a period of time, that trader becomes the de facto choice for these manufacturers because of all the challenges that I said. It just makes far more sense for them to basically take support of a trader and start selling. Similarly, on the demand side, mostly as these two activities are in different geographies, you would again have a trader that talks to a trader in a demand pocket, and then the trader in the demand pocket talks to the SME in the demand pocket, which is typically how, at the bare minimum, 2 or sometimes 4 or 5 agents actually are involved in one single transaction, which is really where the price of the product goes up, quality of the product goes down, the lead time to get the product delivered reduces up. The overall supply chain becomes far more inefficient. A lot of change of hands, a lot of movement of material from one warehouse to the other. Within that, everybody keeps a share of their pie. Ultimately, what happens is that the product the end customer gets is either expensive, or if it is competitive, then I think from a quality standpoint, it has to be inferior quality.
And who manufactures garments? You're talking of garments here, right?
Yes.
Are there like large players, say Future Group, which is into fashion retail? Do they manufacture on their own, or they work with SMEs and
work with both? We have both. Where some of these brands would work directly with us, some of the brands would work with us through contract manufacturers. So we have both the scenarios where we work with some of the brands directly and some of the brands in sort of partnership with their contract manufacturers, right? So in both of these, and then we make this process extremely streamlined for some of these people to procure at the most competitive price, at the best quality, and in the fastest possible time.
Got it. Okay. How did you do the category management here? What is are there like different types of fabrics, and there would be infinite amount of patterns and colors, and so how did you productize something like this?
Productized is like any other project management thing where the person actually ends up uploading a design file or a specification file or what he's actually looking at, and then the same file is actually pushed to a lot of our vendors on the platform, and then each one of them comes back with a quotation for that particular product, and then basically come into in project management on how the goods have to be delivered to the customer in time. But it's actually just like any other market, like a zero inventory marketplace where everything is custom made. And anytime a customer floats an RFP is where it gets connected to a manufacturer, and the manufacturer basically then submits a timeline and the pricing for the product, and the order then gets assigned to him. And then once he starts production, we help our vendors with working capital support. Logistics is completely managed by us, and our customer quality concerns are addressed by us. In a nutshell, we are a fully managed marketplace for all fabric requirements that the brands or their affiliates might have.
The difference between a regular marketplace is that it's not people uploading their inventory, but it's built to order. So it means that it is demand led. Like first, the demand for a particular design or a type of fabric comes in, and then you would float it out to your marketplace vendors and get a quotation from them. Like, how does it work? Give me an example of.
I think for us, the industry that we're talking about, right? I think the industry is fashion, is very fast. So you need to get the product as soon as possible, right? And the fact that fabric procurement is about 2/3 of the time that it takes to ship out a finished garment means that you have to be the most operationally efficient, and your supply chain has to be the most nimble when you're really looking at that part of the business. So the problem statement is that, right? Because at the end of the day, stitching is a fairly manual job, right? You can stitch garment, but if you do not really have the material, what are you going to stitch? Which is one of those things, right? And for us, what our tech platform does is that it basically does matching through AI of the product that is required to the best manufacturer on the platform that can be discovered based the type of the asset, the current utilization, the competency, the timelines, and his ability to deliver an order of that magnitude is really what is decided through technology. And that's where we capture a lot of data point, both from our supply side, especially their size, their capacity, the meters they could manufacture, the timeline, their source of purchasing, like you said, raw cotton or yarn, their source of availing credit, our quality parameters, how does a quality check happens in terms of visibility of production real time for our customers, right? I think there is just so many data points that we capture from our supply side, which basically means that we are able to make the best match of a customer requirement, because understand, if the customer does not get it in time, he's probably going to lose 2.5 or 3 times the amount of money on that raw material if he doesn't really get the product in time. So I think, operationally speaking, it is all a lot of data point that we capture on our supply side, and then a real-time matching through technology with the requirement on the platform that finds out the best match of the manufacturer for that product quality. And especially when there are just a lot of SKUs, right? Like we discussed, every type of fabric is different, the width of fabrics are different, the meterage of the fabric is different. It just fundamentally means that if you really do not have technology, there is just no way in the world you can actually make a matching, because like you mentioned, it's not that the supply guys are uploading their products and then we are showing that to the customers, right? It's more where we do a matchmaking between the order with a particular manufacturer. And that is really where technology is actually leveraged the most today. And we actually have a lot of our tech team is probably our second largest team, with a bunch of guys that are doing some good data science work and are actually able to run a lot of intelligent algorithms on top of the base data that we get from our supply. So I think that's really the clear magic that we built out on the platform to actually find the right manufacturer for a particular order. I think the real question in fashion in general is about the style and the design, right? And who gets it fastest to the shelf, right? So time is of essence, right? And I think when time is of essence, then how do you really keep up the requirement of a brand in terms of what he wants, and then be able to deliver that through a marketplace is actually the most challenging part, and actually where most of the technologies actually gets leveraged, right? All of us know fashion is fast, all of us know a lot of SKUs, but how do you really deliver that in some other part of the country to somebody else is really where the problem becomes far more exciting. Yeah, in some way, that is really how we go about it.
So you've spoken of the value of the matching algorithm, which helps you identify the right vendor. You would, however, I'm guessing, also need more inputs to really make it like a winning platform. For example, credit, or for example, the vendor's own workflows of when he places the order, what stage is the order at, getting visibility into what's happening on the vendor end. Talk to me about some of those things. Like
so absolutely. Obviously, all our SME generally are credit staff, right? Their hindrance to their growth has always been working capital, right? So I think as a platform, we do have a platform where we have NBFC that come on a platform, and the way we envisage this platform is that suppliers will come to look for good customers will come to look for good vendors, lenders will come to figure out good borrowers, right? Like that's really how we build this, right? The platform has to be about that each one actually comes to the platform in an anticipation that the other party is an equally qualified and an equally good business ethic party, and I can engage with them on the platform. I think that's really the view. So to that, absolutely, we have a bunch of NBFC partners that we.
How does the credit happen? Do you give it as soon as an order is placed, or after delivery, where instead of getting paid in, say,
you have an advance amount, because it's just one of those things. The guy actually has to go procure raw material for the order.
Because it's built to order, so generally there's an advance.
Basically have an advance for that. And then once the quality is matched, and then you pay the remaining amount, and then the goods delivered to the customer. So it's actually two parts: an advance followed by a finished thing. Yeah.
What is the role of the NBFCs here? Like they extend a higher advance amount, or they help them like in getting the invoice paid faster, bill discounting, or
Both of the things happen, right? Both the things happen. Both things happen, yes. And typically they have different products that they offer on the platform. And the most common is basically invoice discounting, right?
okay. And how do you get visibility into what's happening at the vendor's
Yes, I think our
shop floor?
I think our workflow has been divided into multiple steps, right? And each of those steps in some way are connected to our mobile app that our suppliers have. They are able to update the real-time status of every step. And the same status is actually visible to the customer. So I think we are going to move that basically to a more intuitive on-ground applications where it becomes a lot easier for our suppliers to actually punch in data and then manage the entire production workflows on the ground itself. So then we're basically thinking of building a lot of suites of product to manage the entire workflow and not just our workflow, right?
Give me help me understand this. Like what this would be like a manufacturing ERP that
Yes, some sort of, yes, absolutely. That's really the vision of it, right? Because sometimes when you're a manufacturer, you have to basically change his habit of managing the entire production on one single platform rather than just managing your production on your platform, right? So I think we built that entire thing out for him to be able to actually manage the entire production on the app, which then makes it far more easy for him to, in fact, derive value of how the entire thing flows, what are the workflows, which client order is getting punched when, what is the delivery date of the order, what advance amount have I received, what is the remaining amount. All of those basically is just visible to him through one single click. That's really the vision. That's still work in progress for us. But the vision really is that customer gets complete. There's a lot of value for the customer in getting real-time updates and status updates of what is getting manufactured. And I just think that is really the core element of what we built. So today, yes, our customers do get real-time updates of the status of their product at each stage, starting from the point they sort of place an order to the point they actually deliver the consignment. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And that brings us to the end of this conversation. I want to ask you for a favor now. Did you like listening to this show? I'd love to hear your feedback about it. Do you have your own startup ideas? I'd love to hear them. Do you have questions for any of the guests that you heard about in this show? I'd love to get your questions and pass them on to the guests. Write to me at ad@thepodium.in. That's ad@thepodium.in.